My name is Lauren Avery. I'm an architectural conservator, or at least I was before I became the kind of woman who walks away from a table with no chair. I'd built a career out of reviving the forgotten stained glass chapels, crumbling museums, frescoes buried beneath decades of dust. Beauty wasn't just a job. It was how I made sense of the world. I came to Paris to restore a 17th-century private estate, belonging to one of France's most prominent political families. I didn't know then that the building wasn't the only thing collapsing. The night everything broke open was supposed to be a celebration, a birthday dinner for Madeleine Delacroix, the family's matriarch. Rooftop restaurant, panoramic views of the Seine, hand-painted menus. I oversaw half the details myself, though I wasn't asked to. I did it out of habit, out of love. We arrived in Blacktown cars. The family moved like a slow parade into the dining room, glossy and polite. Laughter floated ahead of them like perfume. I followed behind, clutching the folds of my navy dress, rehearsing polite small talk I would never get to use. Because when we reached the table, my place wasn't there. No chair. No name card. No space. I stood still, scanning the circle of faces that avoided looking up. Madeleine was already seated. Her son, my husband Felix, turned toward me with the same detached ease he used when a meeting ran over or the driver took a wrong turn. He gave a short, practiced chuckle. "Oops," he said. "Looks like we miscounted." The others chuckled too. Quietly. Uncomfortably. But no one moved. No one stood to say, "That can't be right. Let's fix this." Because it wasn't a mistake. And in that moment I understood. I wasn't supposed to sit. I wasn't supposed to be part of this family anymore. I was being edited out of the picture. Neatly. Publicly. Permanently. So I smiled. Just a little. Then I said, "Seems I'm not family." And I walked out. I had 30 minutes. That's all. Just long enough for the toasts to begin. Just long enough for them to relax. Just long enough to remind them who built the evening they were trying to erase me from. They thought they'd written the final act. But I still held the pen. 6 months earlier, I was on a video call with a Parisian foundation that specialized in the restoration of heritage estates. They had a project they wanted me for. A long dormant mansion on the left bank, owned by a politically influential family with roots stretching back to the days of de Gaulle. The property had been through war, scandal and generations of tightly managed reputation. The Delacroix name still carried weight in elite circles, though I'd soon discover how fragile that prestige had become. I met Felix Delacroix during a conference in New York 2 years before. He was polished, magnetic, always with a story that made the room lean in. He wasn't like the others in his family, or so I thought. He told me he was done with politics, that he wanted a life with fewer masks. He spoke about art like it mattered. About starting over. I believed him. We married after a year. Quietly. Not even in France. He said he wanted something just for us. His mother, Madeleine, called it modern. But the smile she gave me at our courthouse ceremony felt like someone slipping a knife back into its sheath. Still, I moved to Paris. I left behind my clients in Boston, my small but steady life. The studio where I used to mix pigments by hand. I told myself love was a kind of restoration too, that maybe, just maybe, I could be part of something enduring. From the start, I was expected to be useful. Not part of the family exactly, not really, but nearby. Available. Presentable. When they introduced me at fundraisers, it was always "Lauren's work is so niche, isn't it?" Followed by tight-lipped laughter, the kind that doesn't invite you in. But I stayed. I documented cracks in old ceilings while learning to ignore the ones forming in my marriage. Then came Madeleine's birthday, her 75th, and everything shifted. Felix suggested we plan it in Paris, not the countryside like usual. He said his mother loved the city. I later realized he wanted witnesses. I offered to help coordinate, but his sister Elise quickly took over. "Just relax and enjoy," she said with a tone that sounded like a warning. My suggestions were met with nods and then silence. My name never made it into the email threads. I told myself it was fine. I had a project to finish. I wasn't here to compete. But something had changed in Felix. He grew more distant, more absent. And the villa? The restoration budget kept shrinking. Vendors called to say payments hadn't gone through. When I asked Felix, he blamed a delay in family funds. But I'd seen his screen late one night, bank statements with gaps like missing bricks, properties leveraged, quiet sales, a hollowing empire. Still I stayed. Until one morning his phone buzzed while he was in the shower. Normally I wouldn't have looked. I believed in privacy. But something pulled me. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you in Paris. Did you tell her yet?" It was from Camille, his ex, the one his mother had always adored, the one whose name Madeline still said like a prayer. I opened the thread. I don't remember breathing. They'd been talking for months, meeting secretly, planning a future, a baby, due in spring. I forwarded everything to my private inbox. Then I wiped the phone clean. And I smiled through the rest of the day like nothing had changed. The day we flew to Paris for Madeline's birthday, the city greeted us with late autumn rain, thin silver lines slashing across car windows as the driver navigated narrow side streets. I'd packed carefully. A dress for the dinner. Simple heels. Files for my restoration site, though I knew no one in the family would ask me about it. They'd chartered private transport for the week. Polished black vehicles, uniformed drivers, and a hotel whose flower arrangements rotated every 6 hours. I knew. I'd helped design the experience. My name was on some of the contracts. My firm's resources had been quietly funneled in to make up for late payments. Not that anyone said thank you. As we checked in, Madeline barely glanced at me. She was too busy directing bellmen and correcting Elise on the timing of hair appointments. Felix kept glancing at his phone, tapping responses with military precision. When I asked about dinner, he just said, "It's all taken care of," then disappeared for a quick meeting with his uncle. The first night passed in a blur of polite nods and long silences. I was seated between a cousin I barely knew and a visiting diplomat who assumed I was the translator. Madeline delivered a toast. A long self-referential speech about legacy, France, and the importance of family values. Felix smiled at all the right moments. I watched his mouth move and imagined it saying Camille's name. Each day unfolded like a stage play I hadn't been cast in. While I walked the halls of the Delacroix estate double-checking marble samples and temperature readings, the family vanished for unplanned outings. They'd reappear at dinner with new shopping bags and inside jokes. At breakfast I'd find empty seats and cold tea. At lunch, change in plans. At dinner, a performance of togetherness I wasn't invited to join. By the third day I stopped asking questions. I started watching instead. That morning Felix left his tablet open on the hotel desk. A rookie mistake from a man too comfortable with power. I didn't even have to guess the password. He hadn't changed it since last year. I found emails flagged in red. Confidential memos. Legal drafts. There it was, the plan. A pre-written separation agreement. A timeline. A script even. They were going to announce our divorce, delicately of course, at the birthday dinner. Frame it as a joint decision, the end of a chapter. I would be moving on to new creative projects, they'd say. Felix would focus on expanding the family's philanthropic arm. It was public relations wrapped in family dinnerware. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just closed the tablet, opened my laptop, and started preparing my own version of events. The next 48 hours were quiet on the surface. I smiled when expected. I approved floral deliveries. I nodded through Madeline's passive suggestions and Elise's strategic edits to the guest list. But at night I gathered files. Screenshots. Contracts. I mapped out every account that bore my name. Every booking made on my professional license. They thought I was naive. They didn't know I'd been taking notes all along. I knew which winery had my deposit. I knew which boat was scheduled to pick them up on the river. I knew which catering manager owed me a favor. I had leverage, the kind that didn't scream but whispered just loud enough to ruin them. The evening of the dinner arrived dressed in gold. Paris looked like a film set. Street lamps glowing, cafe windows buzzing. The river catching light like liquid glass. From the outside, everything about the night was perfect. Inside the rooftop restaurant, a long round table was set with understated elegance. Linen napkins, hand-lettered name cards, polished silver. I had arrived an hour early, officially to help confirm final details, unofficially to walk the battlefield. I moved through the space slowly, checking angles, noting exits. The head waiter, Mark, a professional I'd worked with on 2 other private events, greeted me with practiced discretion. Madame Delacroix will be very pleased, he said, showing me the guest list and seating chart one final time. There were 13 seats. I counted them twice. I nodded. Everything looks perfect. By the time I returned to the hotel to change, my hands were steady. I wore a muted silk dress the color of weathered stone, something you might see on the walls of a Roman chapel, or a woman who no longer needed to be seen. The family gathered in the lobby for photos. Madeline wore deep emerald and a vintage brooch shaped like a fleur-de-lis. She accepted compliments like offerings, smiling for the camera but never turning toward me. "Lauren," she said airily, "you look restful." It was a compliment designed to sting. The ride to the restaurant took 12 minutes. No one spoke to me directly. Felix kept his phone in his hand, typing quickly, then locking it without looking up. When we arrived, Mark led the group upstairs, where candlelight danced across glass panels and wine chilled in silver buckets. Everyone began to find their seats. Madeline first, of course. Then Elise. Then the uncles and their wives, the cousin with his new girlfriend, the political consultant whose presence meant connections. Felix moved toward the seat beside his mother. I followed behind him and stopped. There was no place card with my name. No plate. No chair. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't oversight. It was the final stroke of a campaign I hadn't consented to be part of. I stood for a moment watching them pretend not to notice. The waiter caught my eye, confused, apologetic. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. Then Madeline spoke, loud enough for the table to hear. "Oh dear. Did we miscount?" A cousin let out a light, scripted laugh. Someone murmured, "So strange." Then came Felix's line, the one he must have rehearsed. "Oops," he said with a casual shrug. "Guess we're one short." It was a performance, all of it. One meant to be seen. I could feel eyes flicking toward me, gauging my reaction, waiting for me to flinch, to cry, to beg. Instead I smiled. "Seems I'm not family," I said quietly but clearly. The words hung there, suspended like dust in sunlight. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. 30 minutes. That was the window I'd given myself, the time between the first course and the second toast. And it was more than enough. I stepped outside into the Paris night, cool air brushing against my skin like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The restaurant behind me buzzed softly. Clinking glasses, layered laughter, the low hum of power being performed. Across the street, I slipped into a small cafe. I ordered a black espresso and took the seat by the window. From there I could see the rooftop terrace, the table still full, their smiles still intact. Not for long. I opened my phone. 30 minutes. That's all I'd need. First, I pulled up the payment portal for the restaurant. The deposit, placed by my firm, not theirs, was revoked with 2 taps. Then came the vineyard tour scheduled for the next day, the private museum access, the river cruise, the jazz quartet for Friday night, the farewell brunch with the retired ambassador. One by one, I canceled every single event I had quietly booked under my company's name. The bookings they'd assumed were family favors or invisible perks. The funds began to refill my business account. Slowly. Steadily. Next, I drafted a message to Mark, the restaurant manager. "Hi. Please inform the Delacroix party that their reservation is no longer covered. Details attached. Lauren." Attached were the revocation of payment, my signed contracts, and an itemized list of all expenses now due, immediately and in full. 26 minutes in. My phone buzzed. "Felix." Text 1. "Where did you go?" Text 2. "This isn't funny." Text 3. "The hotel says the car for tomorrow is canceled. What are you doing?" I didn't respond. At minute 29 I stood, left a cash tip on the saucer and crossed the street. This time, I entered the restaurant through the side service door. Mark met me by the wine cellar. His face was pale. "Madame Delacroix has just ordered the caviar," he said. "Shall I proceed?" I nodded. "You may." From the narrow hallway just beyond the kitchen, I could see everything. The table still glittering under soft lights. Madeline raising a toast. Elise dabbing at her lipstick. Felix looking down at his phone, his expression beginning to shift. Mark approached the table with 2 other staff members. He leaned in to speak to Madeline, who blinked once, twice, then motioned toward Richard, her brother-in-law, the family's quiet financial gatekeeper. He pulled out a card. Mark shook his head. Showed the tablet. More whispers. Confusion began to ripple. And then tension. The kind of tension no vintage brooch could fix. Madeline clutched her necklace. Elise whispered rapidly to her husband. Felix stood, knocking over his water glass in the process, and stepped away from the table, phone to his ear. I let it ring once, twice. Then answered. "Where are you?" he hissed. "What the hell did you do?" I looked through the glass wall directly at him. I thought I wasn't family. So I canceled the family celebration. "You're making a scene." "No," I said. "You were. I just gave it an ending." Felix didn't follow me out of the restaurant. Maybe he knew it was too late. Or maybe it had never really been about me to begin with. Either way, I didn't wait. The next morning, I boarded an early flight out of Charles de Gaulle. First class, paid for with reward points earned from the very bookings I had just undone. I drank tea with lemon and watched Paris shrink into clouds. Back in Boston, the apartment I moved into was half the size of the Delacroix flat, but it was mine. The furniture didn't match, the floors creaked, and my name was on every single piece of mail that came through the door. The messages started before I even landed. "Elise, how could you humiliate our family like that? Madeline, I always knew you lacked class. Felix, please. We need to talk. You don't understand what's at stake." But I did. I understood perfectly. That's why I did it. Within a week, the cracks that had once been whispered about in side rooms began to split open in the light. Vendors demanded upfront payment. Journalists started asking questions. A discreet line in a French business paper mentioned financial discrepancies in the Delacroix Foundation. 2 board members stepped down. Camille's pregnancy, once hidden, became public after she was spotted at a private clinic wearing a ring. The timeline didn't add up, and everyone noticed. No one called it a scandal. Not yet. But the Delacroix name no longer passed through rooms with the same weight. And me? I went back to work. 6 months later, I stood on a terrace in Florence, sunlight brushing across my forearms. I was overseeing the restoration of a 15th century chapel ceiling, soft blues, faded gold, a field of cracked beauty above my head. My phone buzzed. A new email. From an event firm in D.C. Subject: Request for Proposal, Madeline Delacroix Foundation Gala. I laughed. Truly laughed. And then hit delete. People often ask if I regret it. If I regret not fighting for the marriage, or keeping it private. But there was nothing left to save, only a version of myself I no longer needed. The truth is, they didn't erase me. They revealed me. And I don't build illusions anymore. Only things meant to last.